In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this Lucky Stars beanie in the infant size. All other sizes from child through to the large adult are available in the link below that will take you to Ravelry and Etsy. I'll also show you how to do the colour change if you'd like to make yours with the alternating colours like this. For this infant size, the finished dimensions of the beanie will be a 15-inch circumference and the height will be 6 inches. To make this beanie, you'll need a few things. You'll need a 4mm hook, 4.5mm hook, scissors and a yarn needle, and most importantly your yarn. Today I'm using an 8-ply luxury yarn, which is an Australian yarn from Bendigo Woolen Mills. It's quite warm, but also it makes a nice tight finish on the beanie. Any 8-ply will work. All the alterations and ways to adjust the pattern are available on the pattern that's via Ravelry and Etsy. To get started, we'll start with our slip knot on the hook. We're using the 4mm hook for the band. For this first row, use the recommended hook for your yarn and then just go up to the bigger hook, up 0.5 to the 4.5 for the rest of the beanie after we finish this band. So we're going to start with foundation half double crochets. If you're new to that technique, I do have different tutorials that show just how to do this foundation row, but I will show you now as well. So we're going to make a chain 3 and we're going to make our first foundation half double crochet. So wrap the yarn over your hook, insert it into this first chain, yarn over and draw up a loop. So you have 3 loops on the hook. We're going to yarn over and just make a chain with that first loop. So we still have 3 loops on the hook. We have our little chain here. We will yarn over and draw through all 3, and you've made your first stitch. So that's the top, that's the chain. For the rest of these foundation half double crochets, we're going to yarn over. We're going to insert our hook into that chain stitch. You can see there's 2 little stitches there. Insert into that chain, yarn over, draw through a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, make your chain, yarn over and draw through all 3. Do that again, yarn over, insert your hook into that chain, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, draw through that first loop there to make the chain, yarn over and draw through all 3. So top and our chain, which will create the base of the beanie. We're going to make 71 stitches across. So we've made 1, 2, 3 stitches. And you just continue making these foundation half double crochet stitches until you reach the 71. Okay, we're just making our last stitch now. So we've got our strip of 71 foundation half double crochets. This strip should measure roughly around 14 inches, give or take. It will have quite a lot of stretch in it. Just remember that even if it is a little bit bigger, when we make the ribbing, it's going to tighten up a lot. So don't be too concerned if it's a little bit bigger. I just popped a little stitch marker in here so it's a little bit easier to join our ends together. Because we're working in the round, we're going to make a loop with this end. So the easiest way to do this is to bring both ends together, making sure this isn't twisted, which it does have a tendency to twist. We're going to make a slip stitch into this marked stitch. Just remove our marker and just make a slip stitch to join, and it will look quite weird here. So we have our chain 3 from the beginning, then we have our last foundation stitch, and it doesn't really join up. And the easiest way to get that to join is we're going to use this tail, and we'll just join that together and tighten it, and then it will be nice and neat. You don't have to do that now, but it might be a little bit easier when we're doing our ribbing row. I've just popped the tail of the yarn through to join it for this next row. So now we're going to create the ribbing. For the infant size, we're going to create 2 rows of ribbing. You can add more if you like, bearing in mind that the more rows of ribbing that you do, the taller the beanie will become. To make the ribbing, we're going to do front post and back post half double crochets. Normally you would begin with the front post. For this pattern, we're going to start with a back post, as this chain 2 will create one of the bumps of the ribbing. So chain 2, still using our 4mm hook. Yarn over, we're going to work around the post, which is the tall bit of the stitch. So we start with a back post half double crochet. With the yarn over the hook, we insert it from the back around the tall bit of the stitch, and we bring it through the back. Yarn over, draw through a loop, and everything's at the back. You can see it's pulled around that post. Then yarn over, draw through the loop, and that is your first back post half double crochet. Now we're going to make the front post half double crochet, which is a little bit easier. Again, we're going to work through that tall bit of the stitch. So yarn over, insert from the front to the back around that post, yarn over, draw through a loop, then yarn over and draw through all 3 to make the half double crochet. So as you can see, you've got one behind, one that pops out, so your front post and your back post. We continue that all the way along. So we're going to start with our next stitch is going to be the back post. So yarn over around the stitch. You'll see at the back you've got the top of the stitch and that little back of the half double crochet. We're going to go between those two. It gives a nicer finish. Yarn over, draw through the stitch, back post and front post. As you can see, it's starting to come together. These 2 front posts pop out, the back posts go to the back, and you'll notice that your work starts to tighten up quite significantly now. So back post, front post, back post, and front post. So it'll start to look a little bit like that. You continue that all the way along, back post and front post, until you get back to the beginning. So we're coming towards the end of the row now. You can see that the band has now tightened up. You can see the front post and back post stitches quite clearly now, and there is a whole lot of stretch in that band. So we're going to keep working front post, back post. And our last stitch is this one here. This one can be quite difficult. We're going to work the back post into this one. If your end isn't joined, it can be very difficult. Mine's not joined very well. But as you can see, by starting and ending with the back post, that chain 2 has a tiny little bump in it, so it looks like you've done a front post there. To join our ends, we're going to slip stitch into the top of this stitch here. There's our chain 2 into that stitch. Like so. Our third row, we're going to repeat the ribbing. So chain 2, and you're going to do a back post half double crochet in the back post from the previous stitch, and a front post around the front post stitches. It will be a lot easier this time because your stitches are already established. And don't worry too much about that little gap there. When it stretches, it will just look like a normal stitch. So continue your ribbing all the way around until you get back to that last stitch there. And as you come to the end of the row, same process as the first row of ribbing, the front post, ending with the back post, half double crochet, and slip stitching into that stitch. So you will have 36 back post half double crochets and the 35 front post double crochets, which will give you the 71 stitches plus your chain 2 that sort of looks like the front post. The next row we're now going to work half double crochets because we're going to start getting prepared for our star stitches. As I said before, if you want your ribbing to be longer, keep working the front post and back post around, bearing in mind that it will make the beanie quite a lot larger the more rows of ribbing that you do. So for this next row, this is row 4, we're going to chain 1 and we are going to work half double crochets into each of these stitches. So we're going to work into the same stitch because that chain 1 isn't going to count as a stitch, and we want to mark that stitch as well. You don't have to, but I found it much easier when we get to more rows, that marking that stitch makes joining a whole lot easier. So we've half double crocheted into the same stitch. Now we're just going to half double crochet into each stitch around. Once you get to this point, you'll have 2 stitches left. So that's our slip stitch from the previous row and our last stitch. To make the joins neater, we're going to work a half double crochet 2 together with that stitch and that stitch, just so that it avoids that gap that is normally left by the slip stitch. So just wrap your yarn, insert into that last stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over, insert into that slip stitch, draw up a loop, and you'll have 5 loops on the hook, and then yarn over, draw through all 5, and we're going to slip stitch to join into that marked stitch. Our next row is something called a camel stitch. So we work into the back loop. To make it easier and neater, instead of joining with a slip stitch, which is still perfectly fine, but you can join with something called a backward join method. So insert your hook from the back to the front into the stitch you want to join to. Then with your other hand, you're going to pop this loop over the hook, like so. It is a little bit fiddly. Grab the tail of the working yarn with your opposite hand and draw the loop through. Just pop that back behind the hook. So that's drawn the working loop behind, and because we're now going to work in this back stitch, the yarn's already there. It leaves a really nice finish. It is a little bit fiddly, but the effect is pretty great. So now we're going to work row 5, which is our camel stitch. At this point as well, we need to change the hook size, and you can also change colour, which is easy because our working loop is behind, so you can just change the colour like you normally would. So you might grab this really bright pink, and using the 4.5, slip it over, draw up the loop. You can tie a little knot in it as well, and you're ready to go. For this one, we'll just stick with the one colour. So we're going to chain 1, and we're going to work single crochets into the 3rd loop. So if you turn your work over, you'll see that you have the top stitches from our half double crochet, and then you have this extra loop at the back. It's called the 3rd loop. We're going to work our single crochets into that stitch there, not the top 2, but the one behind it. So if you have a look behind your work, that's the stitch we're going to work into there, that one there. So you just turn it slightly, insert your hook in, and make your single crochet. Go to the next, make your single crochet. I also like to mark that first stitch, just because it is a little bit lower and can be a little bit tricky to find when you want to join. So continue working the single crochet into the 3rd loop. As you can see, by working into that 3rd loop, we have the tops of those half double crochets popping out of our work. And I love using this method when we're changing between the ribbing and the work. It's just a nice way to separate the stitches, and it's quite decorative as well. So continue working your single crochets until you get back to the marked stitch. So we're right at the marked stitch now. We're going to make the last camel stitch into that stitch, and we're going to join with the slip stitch into that marked one, which is our first stitch from the beginning of the row. As you can see, by joining with that backwards join, it leaves a really nice finish. You can't really see that there is a join there. Row 6 involves the star stitch, one of my favourite stitches. It is so effective. It looks complicated, but it is super easy. So we're going to start with our first star. The first star of the row is made using 3 stitches. All other stars are used making 2, which is why we start with the odd number in the beginning. So to make our first star, we're going to chain 3, and now we're going to work into this second chain. So you're just going to insert the hook into the stitch and draw up a loop. So we have 2 loops on the hook. You're going to insert the hook into that first chain, draw up a loop. We have 3 loops on the hook. We're going to insert our hook into the base of the chain stitches, which is that little stitch there. And draw up a loop. We're going to insert our hook into the next stitch, draw up a loop. So we have 5 stitches. Insert it into the next stitch, 6 stitches, yarn over, draw through all 6. And it creates this semicircle. To finish this first part of the star, we're going to yarn over and chain, and that secures all of those stitches together. To make the rest of these stars, we're going to insert the hook into that eye of the star that we made with the chain, and draw up a loop. It's the first star, first loop. We're going to insert the hook between these 2 loops, so the last 2 from the previous star, and draw up a loop. We have 3 on the hook. Now we're going to insert the hook into the base of the previous star and draw up a loop. So that's 4. Insert the hook into the next stitch and draw up a loop. 5, and insert the hook again, draw up a loop. We have 6 loops on the hook, yarn over, draw through all 6, and then to secure that star, yarn over and make a chain. So we have 2 stars. To make the rest of the stars, we're going to use the same technique as this second star. So insert the hook into the eye, draw up a loop, insert between the last 2 loops, 3, base of the star, 4, next stitch, 5, next stitch, 6, yarn over and draw through all 6, and then the chain to secure. So we're going to continue that process of stars until we get back to the beginning. Having worked the star stitch all the way around, you should end up with 35 stars at this point. As you'll see, you have worked into the last stitch. You have the slip stitch join from the previous row. If we were just to join with the slip stitch into the top of that stitch, you end up with an enormous gap, and that is never nice in a beanie. So the way that we are going to remove that gap is by working a half double crochet 2 together, but we're going to use the star eye to join it together. So the first part is the same as if you were starting a star, draw up a loop. Now we're going to work into the base of this stitch, draw up a loop. We're going to yarn over and we're going to draw up a loop into that slip stitch as if you would be making a normal half double crochet 2 together. You have 5 loops on the hook, yarn over, draw through all 5, and now we're going to slip stitch into the top of the star. So not that stitch, but that big stitch there. And that is your first row of stars. If you haven't made the star stitch before, the star stitch involves having 2 rows. So this is the base of the star. Now we're going to work the top of the star. And to do that, it is recommended that you get yourself a stitch marker. It can be quite confusing to join it all together without it. So we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn our work. So now we're going to be working with the wrong side facing us. We're going to make a half double crochet into the same stitch. So into that stitch there. So make your half double crochet, and now we're going to mark that stitch. To make the top of the star, we're going to make 2 half double crochets into the eye of the star. So that was created by doing the chain to join all the loops together in the previous row. And looking at the back, you'll see you have, that's the half double crochet 2 together. This little gap here is the eye of the star. So if you turned it over, you could see that's the eye there. We're going to work into only the star eyes. We're going to be skipping that big stitch in between, which is the top of the star. So only into the star eye. We're going to work 2 half double crochets. So we're going to skip that stitch and insert the hook. Make your half double crochet 1, yarn over again, make your second. We're going to skip that stitch and work 2 half double crochet into this eye, like so. Again, skip the stitch, 2 half double crochet into the next eye, skip the stitch, 2 half double crochet into the next, and continue that all the way around, skipping the stitch between the stars and working into the star eye. So I've now worked the 2 half double crochets in the star eye all the way around. We're back to the beginning. To join this row, you're going to skip that first stitch there, and we're going to slip stitch into this marked stitch, which was our half double crochet from the beginning of the row. And from here we're going to chain 3 and we're going to turn our work. So you've created your first row of stars. It looks a little bit wonky at the moment. Just bear in mind that the ribbing is going to stretch a lot. Having used a bigger hook with the star stitch is going to make it a little bit wider, which will be the normal sized head that we would be fitting this onto. And by using the bigger size, it means that the tension in the stars is just that little bit looser. For a tighter finish, you can just use the 4mm, but I'd found that the stars become way too tight for this style of beanie. To make your next row, we are going to repeat the star stitch. So you're going to make the base, turn your work, and then do the 2 half double crochets into the star eye again.